Somewhere in a shallow Kentucky creek, a 175-foot warship is quietly rotting into the mud. A ship that once carried Thomas Edison, fought in 2 world wars, and showed up in a Madonna music video. But here's the strange part. Getting close enough to photograph it can get you reported for trespassing, because it's one of 17 places in Kentucky you're not supposed to visit. And the reason these spots are forbidden has nothing to do with ghosts. That's the thing everyone gets wrong. We see a locked gate, a rusted fence, a building swallowed by ivy, and our brain jumps straight to hauntings. But the real story is colder and far more interesting. Every single one of these places was once alive. A hospital, a speakeasy, a coal town, a military fortress. And each one crossed the same invisible line from essential to forbidden for the same handful of reasons: death, money, liability, and security. This cliff face on Route 68 once hid a restaurant, a gas station, and a fully illegal casino, all carved into solid rock. And the man who ran it beat the law with one of the strangest legal arguments you'll ever hear. His name was George Chinn, though everyone called him Cotton. Back in the 1920s, there was already a calcite mine tunneled into the limestone cliffs along the Kentucky River. Chinn looked at that hole in the rock and saw an opportunity. He turned it into Chinn's Cave House, part roadside diner, part gas station, part Prohibition-era speakeasy. Travelers would pull off the highway, fill up their tank, and order a ham sandwich so good that people drove out of their way just to eat it. That was the front. Deeper inside the passage, hidden away from the road, sat the slot machines and gambling tables. Now, here's where it gets good. When the law finally came after Chinn for running an illegal gambling operation, he didn't deny it. Instead, his defense argued that his games were so rigged, so stacked against the customer, that the gamblers literally didn't have a chance of winning. And somehow, this actually worked. If nobody could win, the argument went, then it wasn't really gambling in the legal sense. He walked. Chinn leaned into the legend too. He had a slogan about the river running right past his door, a reminder that you could lose your money and watch the water carry your luck away at the same time. For a couple of decades, the cave bar thrived. But thriving never lasts forever in these stories. The crackdowns came, the crowds thinned, and today that same cliff is a sagging fence, a collapsed awning, and a sign that reads, "Do not trespass." That's the pattern. Remember it, because you'll see it again and again. The cave hinted that forbidden places have wild backstories. The next one proves these aren't ghost stories at all. They're abandoned ambitions. Let's go back to that warship in the creek, because the full story is even stranger than the cold open let on. It started its life in 1902 as a luxury steam yacht named the Chute, a gleaming pleasure vessel built for a wealthy owner who wanted to cruise in style. Then the world went to war. In 1917, the US Navy requisitioned the yacht, renamed it the Sachem, and put it to work. This is where Thomas Edison enters the picture. The famous inventor used the ship as a floating laboratory, running wartime experiments for the Navy right there on the water. The vessel served through the First World War, returned to civilian life, and then got called up again when the Second World War broke out. After all that, it found a quieter retirement as a New York sightseeing boat, ferrying tourists around the harbor. It even had its brush with pop culture, appearing in a Madonna music video. A yacht, a warship, a science lab, a tour boat, a film prop. This single hull lived more lives than most cities. So how does a ship with that resume end up rotting in a Kentucky creek? One man's impossible dream. A new owner bought the vessel and decided to bring it home. He had it towed an astonishing 2,600 miles inland, down the Hudson, through the Erie Canal, across the Great Lakes, down the Mississippi, and up the Ohio, all the way to Taylor Creek. And then the money ran out. He could no longer afford to maintain or move it, so it simply stayed there, settling into the shallow water, where it remains today, rusted, snake-infested, and reachable safely only by kayak because the landowners report trespassers. The cave was a forbidden place born from outlaw enterprise. The ship was a forbidden place born from one man's dream that outran his wallet. Different origins, same ending. And that reframes everything. These aren't haunted ruins, they're monuments to ambition that ran out of road. The ship and the cave you can at least argue your way up to. The next places were built around death, and that's exactly why they're sealed. Start with Waverly Hills. It opened in 1910 as a tuberculosis sanatorium, back when TB was a death sentence and the only treatment doctors had was fresh air, sunlight, and isolation. The disease tore through the population and Waverly Hills filled with the dying. So many patients died that the staff didn't want the living watching bodies being carted out the front door. It destroyed morale. So they built a solution into the architecture itself. A tunnel, roughly 150 meters long, ran from the main building down the hillside. It was used to move the dead out of sight, away from the patients still clinging to life. Locals came to call it the body chute. The sanatorium finally closed its doors in 1980. Then there's Hayeswood Hospital, another medical building left to decay after its purpose ran out, its windows shattered and its halls open to the weather. Now, you've heard the ghost stories about these places. The internet is drowning in them, but it's worth separating the documented history from the embellished folklore. Yes, real tragedy happened at Waverly Hills, mass death from a brutal disease. And yes, sanctioned ghost tours actually do run there now, so you can legally visit. But the closed wings? Those are still off limits, and not because of spirits. The buildings are structurally failing, floors collapse, ceilings fall. Trespassing into the sealed sections isn't just illegal, it can genuinely kill you. The cave was a trespassing fine. The ship was a kayak trip and a stern landowner. But these places raise the stakes to a different level. The building itself is the threat. Disease emptied the hospitals, but the next places died for a colder reason. Money simply moved on, and an entire community vanished with it. Take Blue Heron. It was a coal mining camp, a town that existed for one reason and one reason only: to pull coal out of the ground. When the coal stopped being worth the cost of extracting it, the people left and the town emptied out. Today it survives as a partially reconstructed site where you can see the ghostly outlines of buildings that no longer have walls. Then there's the Paradise the Fossil plant, a massive coal-fired power station that ran for decades before being shut down and demolished as energy economics shifted away from coal. And the Mushroom Mines, old limestone mine workings later repurposed, the kind of underground space that looks more like a movie set than a real place. Here's the connection that ties this whole half of the story together. These towns weren't built to be lived in. They were built to extract, to take something valuable out of the earth and ship it somewhere else. A place built around extraction has no reason to exist once the resource runs dry or the market changes. So when coal prices fell, when the vein played out, when the power plant became obsolete, these communities didn't slowly decline. They emptied almost overnight. One day there were jobs and families and schools. The next, there was nothing but the buildings. Hospitals were emptied by medicine moving on. These towns were emptied by money moving on. Together, they complete the picture of why places die in America. For every famous abandoned spot you've heard of, there are dozens you haven't. A hidden, parallel Kentucky that almost nobody has cataloged. This is the blurry middle of the list. The roadside oddities and folklore magnets that circulate through Facebook groups and urban exploration maps. Places like Six Gun City and Guntown Mountain, old Western-themed tourist attractions that drew families in their heyday, and then closed, leaving behind fake saloons and empty streets that look like film sets long after the cameras left. Or the Prestonsburg Bridge, the kind of structure that ends up on local legend forums where nobody can quite agree who owns it, or whether you'll get arrested for setting foot on it. That uncertainty is the whole point. With these sites, the ownership is murky. The legality is murky. You genuinely can't say for sure whether walking up to one makes you a curious tourist or a criminal trespasser. And here's the number that should reframe your sense of scale. People who actually catalog this stuff have geolocated somewhere around 98 abandoned places across Kentucky. 98! Not the handful that show up in travel blogs, 98 map sites, and that's just the documented ones. The real total, including everything undocumented, is almost certainly far larger. There's an entire shadow version of the state hiding in plain sight. But for all these named half-legal spots, there's a category above them. A level where the question of whether you'll get caught isn't a question at all. Everything so far is a risk you take with your own neck. These last places, someone takes the decision out of your hands. Welcome to Fort Knox. And no, not the gold vault you're picturing. Inside the sprawling army base sits something called the Tank Graveyard. Rows and rows of derelict armored vehicles left to sit in the open. Old tanks, decommissioned and parked in formation, slowly weathering. You cannot just drive up and see it. It sits inside one of the most secure military installations in the country. The public catches a glimpse only during rare open house events when the base briefly opens its gates. The rest of the time, it's completely off limits. Then there's Fort Campbell, which straddles the Kentucky-Tennessee line. The base maintains a blanket ban on entering all rock quarries and bodies of water on the property, with explicit warnings posted. Violators aren't politely asked to leave, they're removed, they face discipline. The military doesn't rely on a sagging fence and a faded sign. It relies on people with the authority to physically escort you out and the rules to back it up. This is the top rung of the ladder. With the cave, the ship, even the crumbling hospital, the worst case was you getting hurt by your own bad judgment. Here, the equation changes entirely. It's not, you might get hurt. It's, you are not permitted and you will be caught. Here's the misconception that's been sitting underneath this entire list, and it's the one that lands people in handcuffs. Most people assume that abandoned means public. The logic feels obvious. If nobody's using a place, if it's just sitting there rotting, then surely anyone can walk in, right? Wrong. And in Kentucky, that exact assumption is how people end up arrested, or worse. Abandoned does not mean ownerless. Almost every one of these sites belongs to someone, a private owner, a company, a government agency. And the law gives those owners real power to keep you out. Private landowners can ban entry outright. Kentucky law even lets property owners restrict things like concealed carry inside certain buildings. And military rules, as we just saw, go further than anything a civilian owner can do. So that word in the title, forbidden, was never just clickbait. It was literal the whole time. These places aren't mysterious because of what might haunt them. They're forbidden because someone with legal authority has decided, very deliberately, that you don't get to go in. The decay is just the scenery. The rules are the real story. But here's the twist that keeps this from being a purely sad story. Forbidden isn't always permanent. Not every ruin stays a ruin. And one Kentucky distillery proves that the line between forbidden and reborn is thinner than you'd think. Consider Old Taylor Distillery. For years, it was exactly the kind of place. On this list, a forbidden, crumbling ruin, a beautiful stone castle of a building slowly falling apart, fenced off and forgotten. By every measure, it should have rotted into the ground like the warship in the creek. But it didn't. Investors saw the bones of something worth saving. They poured money into it, restored it, and reopened it as Castle and Key, a working distillery and destination that people now pay to visit. The Forbidden Ruin became a celebrated landmark. So that's the genuine open question hanging over every place in this video. Does Kentucky fence these sites off and eventually demolish them, or does it restore them and tell their stories? Both paths are real. Both happen. And the choice usually comes down to money and will. Think about that ghost ship one more time. Right now, it sits in the mud, full of snakes, settling a little deeper every year. But there's another version of its future where someone refloats it, restores it, and turns that incredible history, the yacht, the warship, the Edison lab, the Madonna cameo, into a museum people travel to see. Refloat and remember, or rot into the creek. That fork in the road is the difference between every place on this list. So let's put the whole spine of this together, because it tells you something about America you don't usually notice. Every locked gate in Kentucky hides a story. A hospital that watched mass death and built a tunnel to hide its bodies. A ship that somehow linked Thomas Edison and Madonna before dying in a creek. A cave bar that beat Prohibition with the world's strangest legal defense. Coal towns that money built and then money abandoned in a single season. None of these places are forbidden because of superstition. They're forbidden because they're history with a liability problem. That's the real lesson here. When you see that fence and that "Do Not Trespass" sign, you're not looking at a ghost story. You're looking at the machinery of how a country fences off its own past. The death, the money, the liability, and the security that turn an essential place into a forbidden one. We came looking for spooky spots. What we found was the logic behind every locked gate in the state. And it all comes back to that warship in the creek, settling deeper into the mud while two futures wait for it. Look, don't touch, and let it disappear. Or refloat it and let it tell its story for another 100 years. Kentucky hasn't decided yet, and honestly, neither have we.